Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise to make a few comments
and to support the motion
on the motion before this Honorable House. And Mr. Speaker, before I proceed, I again want to raise an issue which I raised at the last sitting in this House. I think it was very close to midnight when I asked whether or not a warrant has been signed to allow us to engage in borrowing. And we were told by the member from Mako South that in fact he had signed a warrant. And I asked this honorable member to make a copy available to the House. It was not enough to say to us that yes, he had signed a warrant. And I appeal to you as the Honorable Speaker to at least get a copy and satisfy us, honorable members, that we are not participating in an illegal procedure. And Mr. Speaker, for the record and for the entire nation of Senator to hear, I am again, Mr. Speaker, asking whether, it may not have been shared with us, that you as Speaker, you are satisfied that a warrant has been signed by the Minister of Finance. The Prime Minister, the member from Mako South, when I raised it last Tuesday, said there was a procedure that had to be followed for such a request to be made. And I pointed out that that was not the case. As a minister in the House, if you make reference to documents, you have an obligation to make it a document of the House if so requested, and you could find it in Ms., Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I'm asking you, are you satisfied that we're not following an illegal procedure or a procedure which is not in keeping with the laws and the practice established for Parliament? And Mr. Speaker, I trust that you will answer me, Mr. Speaker, before we have a vote on this motion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are here to debate the borrowing of monies for the completion of the Millennium Highway reconstruction and the West Coast Road. And I listened to some members opposite, and the member from Kaswi South is in particular. And he spoke about how the economy being in depression. And I really wonder whether he had a depression, Mr. Speaker, because
he himself?
I'm not saying he suffers from depression, but whether he had a depression, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, some of the things the member from Kaswi's office said in discussing this motion was simply outrageous, Mr. Speaker, outrageous. The member says, we do not want repairs to the Millennium Highway. I can say to you, as a member of Parliament, where the Millennium Highway runs, that we want the Millennium Highway to be repaired. In fact, left to me alone, I would put a toll so your members on the other side would have to pay to pass through Millennium Highway. Only y'all. Only y'all. And Mr. Speaker, of course we want it repaired. And for the honorable member to stand up in this House and to say because questions are raised, it means members do not want it repaired is outrageous.
That's what
the point was clearly made by the member from Denry North.
They said they'll not support it.
He says, at this point in time, if you want to borrow, there are other more critical reasons, Mr. Speaker, that you can come to this House and borrow for.
That means you don't want the project.
And he mentioned a number of projects. And Mr. Speaker, for somebody to intellectually reason that means, Mr. Speaker, that you don't want the repairs goes beyond me, Mr. Speaker. I heard the member say, last week we came into this House and we opposed the motion to do with the borrowing from the IMF, and it means we do not support farmers. Mr. Speaker, I will repeat what I said in the House last week. I will repeat it. I could not support the motion because there were particular uses to which the money would be put that I had a difficulty with and could not accept. I could not accept we borrowing, taking IMF monies to give to Ojo Labs, to relocate the solid waste site in Vieux Fort for DSH. I could not support that. I could not support it for some of the projects that were contained in there. It's against my conscience. St. Lucians want relief. And if those were the purposes, some of the purposes for which the funds would be used, Mr. Speaker, I could not come in this House and support the uses for such monies, especially when the IMF monies were supposed to be for income support and COVID health-related expenditure. I am not ashamed, Mr. Speaker, to say it and to repeat it. And the honorable member, Mr. Speaker, and he does that every time he comes to this House. And I heard the member from Sozel this morning, Mr. Speaker, and I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member from Sozel hardly says a word in this House. Sozel Saltivas hardly says a word, but this morning he found his voice, and he was animated like never before. According to somebody, a Cholma Bradley Kapali. Why is he speaking, Mr. Speaker? A little walkabout you see on Sunday in Strozel, he pay. So he brought down all the big guns, Prime Minister, Chairman of this board and Chairman of that board, to come and walk about in Strozel too. The red bubble ain't even burst yet in Strozel, if you have pay. But Mr. Speaker, all I can say to the honorable member, that he's not really the one that will cause his downfall. And be very careful who you bring to walk about with you. But Mr. Speaker, I want to go back to the member from Castries South East. I really want to go back to him. Because the member will stand up in this House and say that we have a difficulty with Millennium Highway. And we did not invite Sir John Compton to the official opening of the Millennium Highway. This never happened, Mr. Speaker. Never. Never happened. But he would say it in this House, and he would try to say it in his most convincing tone, Mr. Speaker. In his most convincing tone, Mr. Speaker. And that's unacceptable. All of a sudden, the member of Castries South is part of the same government that terrorized Janine Compton. Remember Janine Compton? Yes. Refused to allow her to take the job at the National Trust. And the Prime Minister says openly, I am not supporting her because I can decide she's not getting the job and she doesn't support my party. But today he wants to be a defender of Sir John Compton. But watch what they're doing to the Compton family. Watch what they're doing to the Compton family. And let's go back to history. We know we oppose John Compton philosophically and ideologically. But watch the demise of Sir John Compton. Persons like himself were dancing on Sir John Compton's grave before he died. He was dancing on Sir John's grave, anticipating the day he would die so they could rise and do what they want in the UWP. This is not no UWP of Sir John Compton. I heard a member, the Minister of Health, an aspirant for Castries South, and I wish her well, Mr. Speaker. You do? Yeah, I wish people well. I Mr. Speaker, you know, I wish everybody well, Mr. Speaker. I don't take those things too personal. Says that the revolution died with George Odlum. The UWP died with Sir John Compton. Yes. The cabal that exists now is not the UWP. And I always say there is only one person in this UWP that has the DNA of UWP in him. The member from Castries North. He lives, he breathes, no matter what happened, he say UWP. All the others, Mr. Speaker, are pretenders, Mr. Speaker. So the member from Castries office is defending Sir John Compton in this House with no shame, Mr. Speaker. And we're discussing borrowing, you know, Mr. Speaker. And he goes that far. And he goes that far. And he speaks about committees and tendering. And he wants to accuse the member from Castries South East. The member of Castries South East, Mr. Speaker, is noted in a document for trying to get SLASPA to give the contract for the Uranura International Airport redevelopment to a particular company. And he comes in this House and boasts that $3 million was spent on that document.
On a point of order, he said that I am in a document as trying to give the SLASPA contract, the airport contract. The member needs to provide that document or withdraw that statement.
So, you don't have no document. Why proceed?
Mr. Speaker, We have attempted to make the document a document of this House before, and they objected to it. And if they want, I will go and get a copy of the document, and I will make it a document of the House. And he will make it. Yes, I will make the court proceedings. That's the document I'm referring to. And he said, Mr. Speaker, that they didn't want it a document of the House.
Honorable member.
I thought you told me to proceed.
Oh, no, I'm
you
not
didn't.
saying that.
Sorry.
It is one thing I know of your obligation to make documents you refer to as document of the House. That's a different argument. But it's also another thing to see there is a document accusing a member of the South of doing certain things.
It does.
No, I'm not saying it does not.
Oh.
But I'm saying to you that if you're going to go that far, then I think you should, if it's not to tender the document, but you should make particulars of the document so available to the House so that the House can ascertain. But I will not accept you just simply saying that there are documents that implicates or mention the member. I will not allow you to say it that way, but you would have to give particulars. Although I understand you may not have an obligation to tender a document because you're not making it in your, well, you understand what the obligation is on ministers, as you may not be a minister, but do not just from the top of your head just without making it some information, more particular information available to this House.
Member from Cassius' office, you would like it to be made a document of the House?
Continue, Honorable Member.
Oh, continue. Okay. Mr. Speaker, you could press your mic. I want you to go through that door.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member.
Okay. So,
Mr. Speaker.
No, I saw his hand on the mic.
I still stand on my point of order. The member is imputing improper motive.
Yes, Honorable Member, if he simply says there is a document and he's not going to be specific, then I think you're correct with leaving it open to the air. But he is not under an obligation to make this document a document of the House. But I will not accept him simply saying there is document accusing you or accusing any member. I will not allow that. So
Mr. Speaker, can I move on?
Mr. Speaker, can I just seek clarification
Yes.
from you? Mr. Speaker, when a member of the House says that a process that goes through tender with a body corporate and that a minister of government attempts to that is imputing improper motive. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the member is speaking about. What I can tell you is I know I've never sat on the board of SLASPA, I've never sat on any committee, and I have never been involved in any tender process pertaining to this. So for the member to come and say that I try to influence the process of a tender that went to a separate body that I am not a member of is imputing improper motive.
Honorable Member, and I'm saying it again, I agree with you. By making reference without being specific as to the document he's referring to, he is in fact. And I'm saying to him, I understand his obligation as an ordinary member of the House to tender documents. I accept that. But I will not allow him to stand there, or any member to stand there, and to simply make allegations against an ordinary member, another member in this House. So if he wants to continue on that line, I'm saying he needs to go one step further.
The last time we tried to make the purported document a document of the House, it was not allowed. I am more than willing. I'm more than willing to make it a document of the House. And it will show, Mr. Speaker, that not only the member from Cassius' office made a large number of calls,
Honorable Member.
but Mr. Speaker, I will get the opportunity again to make it a document of the House. Mr. Speaker, there's a saying that evil thinks what evil does. There's a saying, a quotation, that you believe people are doing the things that you do. Mr. Speaker. And I remember CHTTI, Mr. Speaker. CHTTI. And when a member from Castries office was cornered, you know what he said? I can build 10 schools for my wife. When they asked him about CHTTI, evil things, what evil does, Mr. Speaker. I don't have to tell you about Fresh Start, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm a multimillionaire then. You jealous of
Honorable
that?
members.
I have 14 million in an
Honorable
account.
Honorable
If I
member.
have 14 million in an account, make
Honorable
evidence
member,
available to the
Castries
people of
South.
St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I do not believe because a member on one side, in Calypso parlance we call it gift. I don't think you should respond immediately to the member. You're losing focus.
No, I'm very focused.
You are?
I'm very, very
I'll
focused.
remain on
Mr. Speaker, I like it when he taunts me. Trust me. I'm very focused, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, CDP, how much tendering have there ever been for any CDP project? And you know what is a little disturbing sometimes, Mr. Speaker? When members on the other side who are starved of CDP projects cannot even stand up to the de facto Prime Minister. The Pajoa letter, Mr. Speaker. Remember the Pajoa letter? The Prime Minister, the member of Mico South, promised us he would investigate the Pajoa letter. And we are still waiting for the results of the investigation. But that member of Castries South East wants to accuse people, Mr. Speaker. The member from Castries East was tormented over the Bois Bridge. That was costed about, what, $15 million?
No,
11. There was audit report, technical report, forensic report.
Every time Labour Party in power, they do an audit report.
And the cul-de-sac bridge. And the cul-de-sac bridge is $45 million.
47 million.
47 million, Mr. Speaker, for the cul-de-sac bridge. There was technical report into St. Jude, audit report, all kinds of reports. Not one has been made a document at this house. But the member from Castries South East wants to stand up in this house and accuse individuals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard a member from Grosile, Mr. Speaker. I heard him. And he too found his voice. He's not spoken in this house for the last 3 sittings. But he spoke today, and he was in fine form today. Because they've promised him the roads. About, what, $20 million or 20 roads, Mr. Speaker. And I said last sitting, and I'll repeat it, the Reno construction, the Fresh Start, and all those that they are using now to build election roads.
Renault's in that?
Mr. Speaker, we've said to them, and I will repeat it, when the time comes to repay those loans, the welfare of the people of St. Lucia will be put first. Will be put first. I'm not saying nobody will get paid. Frank Charles waited more than 3 years for a little CDP project before the member from Castries office allowed him to be paid. So, no, they were paid. So, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
on a
Speaker,
point of order
I'll come back to you
again.
just now.
Honorable member. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the member said that Frank Charles waited for 3 years for the member of Castries office to allow him to be paid. Mr. Speaker, the member again is misleading the House because the payment was rejected by the Treasury Department, not by the minister. Mr. Speaker, because the Treasury Department indicated that because the same project was cut up into several parts of equal amounts, was done to circumvent the tender process, and was asking that the new government that came into office should sign a direct award backdated for a project that was done during the time of the Labour Party in office. It went to the Attorney General's office for review. So, Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries South cannot stand up in this honorable House and say that the member for Castries South East was the one who blocked the payment of the individual. He needs to withdraw that statement, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Can I withdraw?
You
So to
withdrawing?
move on? Yeah, I'll move. Let me tell you, because we were supposed to be crying.
Are you withdrawing?
If the honorable
With
member from
reference
Cassis Southeast
to-
wants me to withdraw, I will withdraw. And I will add.
But you know you're wrong. That's
No,
Am I
you
wrong?
But we'll ask Frank.
Honorable members.
Can I move
No,
on?
let me. Honorable member, pass yourself. Honorable member. Honorable member. Honorable members. Like I said earlier, both sides have been in government. And on that matter, a nice call to the staff of the ministry would have clarified a number of issues. A call and would have produced documents here, and that the House would be well informed of what happened, then and what happened now. That's a nice way of settling this matter. Because we now asking the parliament to accept, the opposition is now asking the parliament to accept that Frank Charles did not get paid because the ministry delayed payments. Almost, the minister is now saying that's not the case. There was issue with through Treasury.
You believe that?
How do we settle? So I'm saying to you, that would have been the easiest way to do it, provide the documents to this parliament. But nevertheless, you are now indicating that you're withdrawing. Withdraw. Let's move
Because
forward.
it's one thing to say, there was a reason for a delay. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, the same member from Cassis office said on a television program that he had to write to the Taiwanese and backdate, remember, the dates on projects for them to be able to get the money because the projects had already been implemented. The same member for Cassis office. Same. But hear what his explanation now. Here is explanation now. But let's move on, Mr. Speaker, because Frank Charles was supposed to cry.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order again. And every time you do it, I'll stand on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I am clear on the record. The member is
Honorable
again,
member, please.
the member is again misleading the House. Because what was done is that all the projects of CDP was implemented prior to the election of 2016. And when we came in, no request had been made to the Taiwanese for the funding of the projects, which was the standard operating procedure that we inherited. What we had to do was to write to the Taiwanese with the list of projects that had been implemented. And I came out publicly and I explained that. So what the member is saying there, I didn't go and backdate information for the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese was brought up to date, and I said we had to treat the projects as if they had not been done, because that was the requirement in order to get the funding to pay the hundreds of contractors who was working on the night before elections with torchlight to try and finish projects.
But that can be said with impunity.
Frank Charles say yes.
Honorable member,
Yeah, can I
you
proceed?
heard of the
Can I proceed?
explanation.
You have the
Yeah.
document.
So,
Take
Mr.
note and
Speaker,
continue.
you know,
I will bring them and circulate them.
Mr. Speaker, so when the member comes there to debate
You agree I can bring it and
the
circulate?
borrowing, Mr. Speaker, you really have to wonder, Mr. Speaker, this is about roads, Mr. Speaker. I heard the member from Grosley speak about roads. Mr. Speaker, people are paying $1.50 on every gallon of gas. They have an expectation that the road will be fixed because they are paying $1.50 on every gallon of gas. And let me just share a little word with the member from Grosley that the roads will not save him. The roads will not save him. Do not believe your constituents will be assured because you build the roads for them. Too little, too late. He has two ways to lose. Either his kin or Kenson run him out. Two ways to lose. So choose which one you want. Not the roads. It won't be about you, honorable member. Because the people of Grosley expect their roads to be fixed. But they have deeper problems than just the roads. It's about the state of the country. It's about how people are treated in this country. It's very deep, honorable member. Very, very deep. But people are more than just roads. Don't make people, true, that's true. All of us in here, all of us in here, all of us in here. But Mr. Speaker, I heard, sorry, I was waiting for you. I heard, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member,
Mr. Speaker,
continue.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you know, sometimes you laugh. You have to laugh at when you hear members speak. I heard a member from Barbono speak, Mr. Speaker, and it comes back to the whole question raised by the member from Catches East about the process and tendering. WASCO, Mr. Speaker, and I have to say something about the state of water supply in this country at this present point in time. People in my constituency keep calling me religiously about this no water, Mr. Speaker. For weeks they cannot get water. WASCO, the John Compton Dam. You see the drought we experience in this country is a man-made drought we have. A man-made drought. And one day WASCO will be asked to account for what happened at the John Compton Dam, Mr. Speaker. Up to this point in time, they cannot start desilting. Up to now, they cannot start.
Ready?
The contract, Mr. Speaker, and I've said it in this house again, and I will say it again.
They haven't started this.
No. And the persons that I think we even paying a daily rate to the persons in the contract. You know what happened, Mr. Speaker?
Huh?
For the first phase, pre-qualifications were put out. One company alone met the deadline. One company in St. Lucia met the deadline. They did not send the tender documents to that company. They called two other companies after the deadline or on the day of the deadline to send in documents. When to issue the tender documents, the one company that made the deadline and the only company in St. Lucia with the capacity to do the work was not even given tender documents.
Mr. Speaker,
Now,
on a point of order. It's not my habit of standing here on a point of order. I listen to members speak and I allow them to speak. But Mr. Speaker, I'm sure this Honourable House will remember that, that matter has been brought to the Honourable House. I came to the Honourable House, I made a statement as to the process and I gave documents as to the process. I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, to ask the member to desist on making these statements again because I've explained in this Honourable House what transpired.
Honorable member Castro South, that exact point, as you said it and as the member said it, have been raised before.
Mr. Speaker,
And then he stood on the same point.
never made documents available in this house.
Well, no, not
Never.
document of the House, but the same argument that this is not.
I will
Honorable
repeat
member,
it again,
honorable member.
but I know what
So I'm not saying no. I'm not saying no that you may not be correct, but I'm saying that we've dealt with that point before, and we came to the conclusion, or I came to the conclusion, that you should not proceed with that argument.
I should not
Continue,
proceed.
and this is from referring to that.
Mr. Speaker, it will all come to light. Phase 2, the company that was given the contract to do the desilting, Mr. Speaker, did not have the lowest price. I have all the prices, all the companies, and all the revised prices because they were asked to revise their prices. And even the company that got it, when they revised their price, it was still not the lowest price. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. No, I've moved on past phase 1. I'm into phase 2 now. Phase 2 now. I'm into both phases had issues, Mr. Speaker. I have the letters that were sent to CDB and CDB responses. You know, Mr. Speaker, they want to talk about tendering committee and evaluation committee, Mr. Speaker. And as a result of the bad management of that project, almost over $20 million spent. Up to now, we cannot finish the disposal site for the silt. And the silt in the dam is getting higher and higher and less water, and St. Lucians are suffering. And you want to talk about projects and how good you all are in executing projects. But that full story will come out in time, Mr. Speaker. Will come out in time. Yeah, a lot, Mr. We have so many stories to come out, Mr. Speaker. There is so much that will have to come out, Mr. Speaker. So much that will have to come out. Mr. Speaker, you know, in January 2019, a story was carried in St. Lucia that works on the Millennium Highway will start. And the member from Castries North was with his workers' helmet and saying, workers are working, the road starts next week, January 2019, and we come in today. We come in today, Mr. Speaker, to borrow money for this project, counterpart funding. I know the origins of the grant, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the member from Beaufort South will not want me to go into details on it.
You're welcome.
It all started with a letter from the member from Beaufort South. I was in another life, and I transported the letter to the Prime Minister of England. The member from Beaufort South wrote a strong letter. Strong letter. No, I'm telling you, I know the history of all of this to Kamran. And one thing led to the next. So nobody not against the use of grant funds. Under the present member from Castries South East, St. Lucia has gotten the lowest level of grant funds ever. And go and check the estimates, Mr. Speaker. Go and check the estimates. John Compton days, St. Lucia had a proud history of getting grant funding under Kenny Anthony. When member from Labrie was Minister of Foreign Affairs, high levels of grant funding. And then, Mr. Speaker, and the lowest level of grant funds, and we'll see how we don't know about grant funds. We don't know how to make grant funds work, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an interest in roads, and I've said to the member from Castries North, I've said to the member from Castries North, 2 roads were promised for Castries South, the Marigot Road and the Bassas Joseph Road. He stood in this honorable house and he gave me the assurance that the roads would have been done the last year. And I'm hearing roads in Formanger now being done, and Bassas Joseph is not getting its road. Mr. Speaker, you spend the afternoon where? In Bassas Joseph. So, member from Castries North, you have to be very careful where you spend your afternoons. Because the Bassas Joseph Road, Mr. Speaker, and when members speak about using the opportunity to borrow money to do other roads, I would have loved to hear that the Bassas Joseph Road and the Marigot Road would have been repaired, Mr. Speaker. I would have loved to hear that. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not against fixing the Millennium Highway or the West Coast Road. I'm not against it. And another motion, we will discuss in detail what are the critical needs of this country at this time. What are the critical needs? Whether at this point in time, if we have any space for borrowing, what it should be borrowed for. And the point was raised by the member for Beaufort North. If you already have $90 million, and he asked a good question, I don't even know the answer. Can the project start without the counterpart funding already been put up front? Can it? And maybe the member from Castries North will explain. Can the project start? Can the $90 million start the works? No, I don't. Kenny and Alva and all. So, Mr. Speaker, do we need to? And that's a good enough question. I'm hoping the member will answer. Because if we have space for borrowing, Mr. Speaker, we have some critical needs at this time. And maybe we can focus on it. So, Mr. Speaker, I will welcome the repair of the Millennium Highway. It is said to be a roller coaster. But I will also say to you, Honorable Mr. Speaker, every time I go up north, I have to go on a roller coaster. Every time. Outside Sandals. After, well, I must say, I'm hearing that you're going to repair the road next to my house, so I'm glad you'll be doing it. Maybe you might. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to make one final appeal, Mr. Speaker, that we are in COVID. We are facing a crisis in this country, and we must get our priorities right in this country. We must get our priorities right. And we have no reason to believe that this government has gotten the priorities right, Mr. Speaker. And that is my position on this motion. Thank you very much.